to another episode of History in a Nutshell. Now, we've been chatting a bit recently about the Cold War. You can't really do that without thinking a bit about communism. So, what I've thought of doing is just, rethinking about communism a bit. Because it's a word that's used a lot, and in the English language, and I suspect in other languages as well, it has certain connotations, certain attributes and certain characteristics are applied to it. I'm sure we've all been sat in school at some point, and there's some sort of monologue about communism versus capitalism. Is that a shared experience with all of us, right? Often in history or in some related discipline. And there's a monologue coming shortly after you hear that PowerPoint come up on how communists think everyone should be, equal. Right. You see that echoed a lot in popular culture. You know, a sort of blackboard definition of communism is like people being, equal in it. You know, a very, very boiled down message like that. Well, first of all, that's actually incorrect. And I can do a video on why this is later. But in a nutshell, communism is based on the idea of a world of post-scarcity, in the strictest sense of the word, from each according to his ability, each according to his need. So, everyone can do what their abilities want, and anything they need is given to them. What we mean by communism, for the most part, is in fact Marxism-Leninism, the ideology of Vladimir Lenin based on Marx, and the various offshoots of that occurred throughout the 20th century. Eurocommunism, Maoism, Titoism, so forth and so on. But what if communists have always been a bit more pragmatic than common perception would have them to be? And what do communistic policies really look like? Well, communists distrust free markets and want a planned economy. Do they really now? Deng Xiaoping opened China, the People's Republic of China, up to international markets. In fact, you could say he embraced quite an extreme form of capitalism with sweatshop labour and all sorts of dubious outsourcing practices from various NATO member states. And what's interesting is he had a communist defence to explain how he did that. Well, China was not developed enough, really, for socialism, yet alone communism. It had to go through a capitalistic stage to allow for accumulation and development, so the assets and the capabilities and the resources would be there to build socialism and to ultimately achieve communism. Interesting. Well, communism was really an outgrowth of the Soviet foreign policy, and the communists did anything the Soviets wanted them to do. Did they really now? Well, under Enrico Berlinguer, the Italian Communist Party became very critical of the Soviet Union, became very critical of Soviet foreign policy. Some Italian communists claimed, and Berlinguer perhaps somewhat encouraged this, that the KGB once tried to kill him. Interesting take. Berlinguer accepted Italy's membership of NATO and was happy for that to be a prerequisite in coalition negotiations. Membership of NATO, an explicitly anti-Soviet alliance to assert independence from the USSR for Italy. Interesting take. Well, communists are all internationalistic though, and they don't really believe in the nation state. Maybe. The Communist Party of France, most of the Cold War, wouldn't shut up about the nation state. You look them up, they're always going on about it, like a broken clock. They were very proud of their patriotism. There was the idea of socialism in the colours of France. A very vague phrase that meant whatever the person saying it was meant to say, but a reoccurring theme in their rhetoric nonetheless. That was because the French Communist Party, throughout the Cold War, portrayed itself as asserting France's independence against NATO and the EEC, and were happy to basically outgun other parties on Euroscepticism, NATO scepticism, scepticism of an Atlantic alliance, I suppose you should say, and scepticism towards US foreign policy. They were very eager to use their hostility to Western integration to present themselves as genuine French patriots. So how's that for that? Bit different than you would have thought. Now, there's various reasons for this. Is this just pure factionalism, or is there something more to it? Well, perhaps Marxism-Leninism has always been a more pragmatic ideology than we previously thought. Because by definition, a consistent Marxist-Leninist is a Hegelian. They believe in continuous change. Thesis, synthesis, antithesis, so forth and so on. They believe in dialectics and dialectical materialism. That there's opposites occurring and that things are born out of conflict. So it makes sense that a communist would be quite strategic in their thinking. A Chinese communist might allow a very primitive and actually quite crude form of capitalism to emerge in China to kickstart China's development. A French communist might appeal to patriotism and scoff at their opponents being too pacifistic or being unpatriotic. An Italian communist might accept membership of NATO, at least for the foreseeable future, to make themselves appeal more plausible to the electorate, and possibly to distance themselves from the Soviets, which, according to their analysis, was the right move on the chessboard. In the same way, liberalism is in some ways a purer ideology and a more principled ideology, as explored in previous videos, while in a strange way, perhaps communism, Marxism-Leninism, is a much more pragmatic and realistic ideology in terms of its modus operandi. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this interesting train of thoughts we have here at History in a Nutshell? I'd love to hear your feedback on this video, hear what you think, and engage with you a bit in the comments section. Have a great day, and thanks for watching History in a Nutshell.